Sup guys, Bjorn here. I hope you're having fun with 9.1, even there's not a whole lot to do obviously. If you don't have anything to do, I would suggest push some keys, it's a really good push week. I'm not gonna do that though, I'm gonna give you my 9.1 Demonology guide for Warlocks. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it, and subscribe if you want more 9.1 content. I'm gonna be pumping out guides for different specs, mainly probably Windwalker and Warlocks, because that's what I'm playing, but also just general 9.1 guides, you know, what to do, where to do it, stuff like this. So be sure to subscribe if you want more content, and let's get straight into the guide. So I figured we'd just start with a quick overview of Demonology. What does it do? How does it play? Where do your strength lie and stuff like that? So, well, you're a pet class, as you probably could have guessed. Most of your damage is going to come from your pets. You do have a lot of different pets to summon, you know, dogs, some imps, Vile Fiend, you know, the Grimoire, and then you have the big Tyrant, of course, which is your biggest CD. In terms of the profile, your Tyrant is pretty similar to Fire Mage's Combustion, right? It's a short CD, and most of your damage is going to come in that window, and you can also reduce the cooldown with the Legendary. So plays very similar to Fire Mage, also has some like instant procs and stuff, kind of like Fire Blast on Fire Mage. Feels decently similar to that. They do have some good single target. That's probably much the biggest strength of the Demo, right? Is that you're just going to pump on single target. It's pretty much always been that way, but this patch, you're just actually doing good numbers as well compared to other specs, right? And if you get a lot of procs, you get some Demon Bolt procs, you have Dread Calling on the Dreadstalkers as well, then suddenly you become pretty mobile. Not a lot of your time is actually going to be spent casting, like hard casting spells, and since Hand of Gul'dan, your main spender, is only 1.2 second cast with my haste level, it actually feels really nice. You're just pumping out those hands right on with a short cast time, so pretty nice, a lot of movement there. Some strengths and weaknesses, some pros and cons, you know. Top tier single target dispatch with Demo. With a Tyrant window, you're actually pumping on single target. It's gonna feel really fun to play with. And that means they're probably gonna be decently desirable in raids, right? Especially on some of the bosses. Even though Destro is a little bit better on most bosses still. They have consistent uncapped AoE, which is interesting because consistent and uncapped isn't that great together sometimes. You know, you want the burst uncapped AoE. But it does mean that if your tank is pulling those like big 12, 15 mob pulls, and if it's a high key especially where it's going to live long, then you do actually have some decent consistent AoE there. Even just in a normal 15 with like a 5 target pull, you do consistent AoE on every single pull, because it's not really tied to any CDs, it's just dogs and hand basically, it does all the AoE. And this is with the right talents, right? So a little bit talent dependent here. If you're running the single target build, you don't really have a lot of AoE, although there is a new build in 9.1, which we're going to talk about later, that is good for both single target and AoE. So pretty good news there. Demo also scales very well with stats. All of their stats are good, and they also have stam scaling with all their pets. So HP is also good, you know. Very good stat scaling spec, and it's very mobile and tanky. Obviously it is a Warlock spec, so it's always going to be pretty tanky, but your pet is always also taking some damage for you, and if you get those procs, which you are going to get a lot of, then you're just very mobile outside of the setup for the Tyrant, that is. And you also have a baseline interrupt, which is a big deal compared to other Warlock specs, right? The other Warlock specs are going to have some of the Fell Hunter, where you can just have your normal damaging pet out. So negatives, they're very setup dependent. In the Tyrant window, you're gonna have to play it perfectly, right? You need to have pooled before, you need to use the right spells in the right order, you need to keep track of all your demon timers, and you need to summon that guy as well with a 1.7 second cast time without getting like clipped or interrupted or needing to move for a mechanic or quaking or whatever it can be, you know. So can be a little fiddly in the setup there. And you also have one of the worst target swapping in the game, right? You pretty much don't have any instant damage. All of your damage is your pets. So if your pets don't swap, you're not going to do any target swapping damage. And if they do swap, well, you're still only going to do like really subpar single target from all your pets just autoing them up. So very bad target swapping. the only way you would target swap is basically if you know something is coming out, right? You have a timer on a mob spawning maybe, and you will summon your tyrant right before that, and you can let your tyrant target that mob. Then you have some good target swapping obviously, but then you're also wasting your biggest CD on it. So speaking of that CD, outside of it, you don't really have a lot of single target. It's mostly just the imps doing the fireballs, over and over again. Not the best single target outside of CDs for sure. And you also have pretty much no burst AoE. As we said before, it's consistent uncapped, but there's really no burst there. There is one way to do it. There's one way to do some burst AoE. And we're going to talk about that later in the tips and tricks section, so stay tuned for that. But it's not even that great, honestly, and it is going to help you in the dungeons, but raids, it's pretty much not usable. So, lastly, ties into the first point as well, very setup dependent, very punishing if you don't get that setup off. If you fuck up the setup, if you have to cancel your tyrant cast, or if you let your pets expire before you do him, or if you just have pooled poorly before you go into that window and you don't have any soul shards to spend, well, then you're going to be way worse off than if you actually have set up your tyrant window correctly. So, can be pretty punishing. But other than that, outside of the window, it's pretty easy to play just a normal rotation. So, in that case, pretty nice. Going into the talents, which is pretty important for Demonology, right? We have basically two different builds with some variations. We have this old build from 9.1, right? This is a single target build. We have Demonic Strength, it's just like something you use on CD and single target. Demonic Calling is very good for all demo specs basically. It's just a nice soul shard saver. You don't have to spend shards or cast time on your dogs, right? It's just real nice. These are the ones that aren't that great, so I would pick this in pretty much every single scenario. Then we have Vile Fiend. This guy is gonna buff up our Tyrant, which is really important on single target. He also just does some decent single target damage. Same goes for Felguard, right? Does some decent single target damage, and he buffs up our Tyrant a lot. So these two are really good on single target. And then we have the biggest talent of them all, right? Demonic Consumption. You're gonna run this every single time, no matter what you play. It basically just makes your Tyrant drain HP from all your other demons. That's why you need to have a lot of demons out when you summon him, right? Because the more demons you have, the more HP those guys are gonna have. The more HP the Tyrant is gonna drain from them, the more he's gonna empower himself, and the more damage he's gonna do. And this is also where your stam scaling comes from for Demo. If you've ever heard of like Demo wanting stamina, stacking Rallying Cry, stam trinkets and stuff like this. This is the reason for it, Demonic Consumption drains health from all your demons, but your demon's health actually scales off of your stamina, right? So if you have more stamina, all of your pets are going to have more health, and then the Tyrant is going to drain more health. In terms of the other talent build, it actually got buffed in 9.1, and I like it a lot. It's really versatile now. You go Dreadlash and from the shadows instead of these two here. And what Dreadlash does, it just makes your Dreadstalkers AoE basically when they go in. And from the shadows makes that AoE attack that they do from Dreadlash. It just makes every single target take 20% more Shadow Flame damage from you from the next 12 seconds. And this is really good since, for example, Implosion, right? Implosion is Shadow Flame damage. Hand of Gul'dan is Shadow Flame damage. Your Tyrant now has Shadow Flame damage. And this was the change going into 9.1, right? Before, this didn't affect your Tyrant. Now it does. So this is actually good on single target now too. Before it was basically only good on AoE. So, because of this, well, you could take this build in a Mythic Plus key, for example, in a Tyrannical key, and you will still do comparable single target to the other build. Maybe a little bit worse, right? But still very comparatively good single target. And then you would still have the AoE benefits on every single AoE pack. So I think this build is going to be really strong. This talent here is also interchangeable, right? On AoE weeks, the more AoE you do, the better Soul Conduit is going to be, right? You're just going to be spending a lot of shards, you get more imps, you get more hands, you get more implosions, you get more CDR on your Tyrant from the Lego. We're going to talk about that in a bit. So Soul Conduit is a really strong option. You can definitely play it on Fortified weeks, What you are going to struggle with, though, is that Felguard does provide a lot of single target damage, because he's just another demon in that window, right? Demonic consumption scales over him very well. And he just does some good damage himself, right? So this is a little bit of personal preference here. Both are very doable. I personally prefer Felguard in most situations, but Soul Conduit can be very fun to play with as well. And those are pretty much the only talents you're ever going to take, right? So these rows that I didn't touch on, this row and the 40 row, you know, these doesn't really matter. These are just utility talents. You can pretty much pick whatever you feel like here. I usually go for, like, all of these three are good. Here I almost always pick Mortal Coil, just because it's healing you as well, right? So it's a little bit of a defensive benefit. But I mean, either of these are fine as well if you want to go for them. Moving on to the Legendaries, and this is where Demo has some good options, but I feel like there's still one big winner in 9.1, and that's going to be the Wilfred Sigil of Superior Summoning still. It just makes it so that every soul shard you spend reduces the cooldown of your Tyrant by 0.6 seconds. And it might seem bad if you play the other Warlock specs, you know, 0.6 seconds, not that much. But in Demo, you actually spend a ton of shards, right? You spend way more shards in Demo than you do in either of the other ones. So every shard doing 0.6 seconds is actually going to be a big deal. It does reduce the Tyrant cooldown of about around 30 seconds, you know, depending on your haste values and your talents. So, I mean, that just brings the Tyrant down to a minute cooldown, which is super powerful. And that makes it line up with Soul Rot here from the Nightfey Covenant. It makes it line up with Vile Fiend a little bit better. It makes it line up with every other Felguard, right? So this has some big implications, especially if you're playing this build here, the single target build. But even in this build, I feel like Wilfred is really good, and if you're playing Soul Conduit, well, then guess what? You're going to be spending more shards, so Wilfred's going to become even better too. Then you have another option here, Grim Inquisitor's Dread Calling. This is a little bit more AoE focused. I still think it's worse than Mythic Plus overall, especially in high keys, because Wilfred is just so damn powerful. You know, you get that combustion profile that the Fire Mages have. The whole reason Fire Mage was so good is that 1 minute burst profile, right? So for you to just copy that with Wilfred's is pretty powerful. That said, you can definitely play Grim Inquisitor's Dread Calling too. It's not far behind. It just makes it so that every soul shard you spend instead increases the damage of your next dogs. So you're going to have less Tyrants, but every single dog you summon is going to be a pretty big dog, right? They're going to pump, they're going to apply that Dread Bite to all of the targets, right? So if you're playing this build, if you're doing Mythic Plus, I think this is a good choice, but it still plays worse than Wilfred's in my opinion, at least in high keys. Now, the more fortified weak, it's you know, the more AoE you're doing. If you're maybe in a Mists of Turna Scythe or something, maybe this could be an option, or just a dungeon with a lot of AoE. But generally, I found Wilfred's just play out better. Then we have Force of War Nightmare. Not that great, but it's not far behind either. You know, you could play it in like every single scenario if you want. It's good on single target, it's good on AoE. It's just an overall pretty solid legendary. Implosive Potential, it's only good on AoE, right? Because you want to hit at least 3 targets with Implosion to get the massive haste buff. It is pretty strong in AoE for sure, but I just feel like it still falls behind both of Grim Inquisitor's Red Calling and Wilfred's still in like Mythic Plus settings. So can be fun if you would just want to play around with it, but I feel like it's slightly worse than these still. Okay, so Soulbinds and Conduits. Well, you're gonna be Nightfey for Warlock. It's best for all 3 specs, so that's pretty pog, right? For Demo, Naya is by far the best Soulbind, because if you just read this spell here, you'll instantly understand why. Grow Invigoration, well, Redirected Anima increases your maximum health by 1%, which already we talked about the max health scaling, right? That's really good for Demo. And then your Mastery by 25. Mastery is also a good stat for Demo. And look at the last row here. Soul Rot grants you 8 stacks of Redirected Anima. Well, Soul Rot will grant you 8% max health and a ton of Mastery on CD, right? And it lasts for 30 seconds as well, so it's a really long window. And Soul Rot with the Wilfreds lines up with every single tyrant. So for every single tyrant, if you're playing Naya, you're gonna have 8% more max health and some pretty good mastery buff, right? Really strong for the tyrant. You're definitely gonna want to be playing Naya. In terms of the row here, I usually go for the double potency conduit. In 9.1, I would still suggest going for triple potency conduit here with Naya, although this is not like, this is pretty decent. You could definitely pop into here if you want, into another endurance here, and forgo one of the, because after these two on AoE, Born of Blood and Carnivorous Stalkers, you don't really have like any amazing conduits for AoE, although Tyrant Soul is pretty good still. So yeah, in terms of the conduits, as I said, Born of Blood, really good. Hand of Gul'dan has 22% chance to generate a charge of Demonic Core. Well, guess what? You're just going to be pumping out those Demon Bolts, and with this scaling up with item level in 9.1 as well, it's going to be a lot stronger. Same goes for Carnivorous Stalkers. This has insane synergy with the Dreadlash from the Shadows build, right? Every attack has a 4.2 chance, scaling with item level, so it's going to become like 5-6% in 9.1. Chance to trigger an additional Dreadbite. And this Dreadbite obviously procs from the Shadows and Dreadlash, and if you get good RNG and Carnivorous Stalkers reprocs on AoE, you can do some insane damage with this build. It's really consistent. No, it's not consistent in terms of, it is RNG dependent obviously, but you're gonna still like probably reproc on most packs, and it still just has good synergy since the dogs are out every 20 seconds, right? It's just a lot of chances to reproc this. And since From the Shadows works with your Tyrant now, if you like send your dogs out and then you summon your Tyrant when they're about to expire, well, since you extend those dogs by 15 seconds, they're also going to have a lot higher chance to reproc during that time, right? So it is really good even in single target now with the new 9.1 changes. And personally, considering how good this build is in single target, and considering that these talents also work with it, or sorry, these conduits also work with it, personally, I might just like not change these conduits for the entire patch. Although, if you want to be optimal, the best build on single target is still going to be these talents here with the Fel Commando instead of the Carnivorous Stalkers, right? So there's something to keep in mind there. If you want to be swapping conduits a lot, there are different builds for AoE in single target still, but the big thing with 9.1 is the AoE build is so close in single target that you're probably not going to have to change as much as you did before. In terms of the other Soulbinds, if you really need to get either of those, it's not the worst thing in the world. Obviously, they're not that far behind, but you still have to remember this 8% max health thing here. This is bigger for Demo than it is for the other specs. So I would suggest playing like Destro or Af in either of these if you really want to be playing the other Warlock specs, and keep this one for Demo. But that's obviously up to your personal preference. In terms of stats, well, haste is what you're gonna want to be stacking, especially early on. I've got 20% right now. It's still a little low. You would probably like to get this up to like 25, somewhere around there. Crit is strong, but depending on what trinkets you have, you might start overcapping on critting your CDs and stuff. So I don't have a lot of crit here, but it's not really my own fault. I've just been picking up whatever gear I can get my hands on, basically, to gear this alt up. I have 6% verse. This is bad. You don't want to have any verse. Verse is the worst stat for Demo by far. Or not by a massive mile, but it is the worst stat. So definitely stack either of these three over verse and prioritize haste first, because it's just going to make the Tyrant window that much nicer to set up, you know, more hands, more imps, easier to time everything with the demons expiring and stuff like that. Lower cast times on your Tyrant, you know, your Tyrant is baseline 2-second cast time. Very yikes if you don't have a lot of haste. So I definitely suggest getting this up higher if you can. In terms of specific gear for Demonology, there's not a whole lot, because before in 9.0, this here was pretty good for Demo, the emblem from PvP, but it did get heavily nerfed in 9.1, not because of Demo. I think it got nerfed because of PvP, but it did hit Demo as well. So this is not going to be as strong as it was in 9.0. And I'm currently running... This is a bad trinket, but I'm currently running a 220 Ruby here, which is going to be one of your best Warlock trinkets overall. And why it's so good with Demo as well is because you're going to draw the enemy's soul, and it grants you 1,000 crit for 16 seconds. And you can time... Your timer lasts for 15, right? So if you pop this right before you summon your Tyrant, well, you're going to have that crit value for the entirety of your Tyrant. And your Tyrant is going to pump that much more. And it's also on 2-minute CD, which lines up perfectly with every other Tyrant. And that also lines up with every Grimoire, right? So every other Tyrant is going to be this huge Grimoire, Ruby Tyrant that just pumps. And then every other Tyrant is going to be a little bit smaller, but still. Ruby is a really, really good trinket. Since they nerfed double on use in 9.1 as well, look, if I use this here... Oh, well, I need a target. If I use... I still need a target. I am fucking trolling. Okay. If I use this trinket here, you can see my other trinket gets on a 40-second internal CD here. 40 seconds. In 9.0, that was 20 seconds. That is nasty. So double on use, not going to be as strong in 9.1. You're definitely going to want to be keeping the Ruby in this slot here. I don't really know what's going to be best. Probably like one of the new raid trinkets, passive raid trinkets or something. Since you can't use double use. It's also possible that there's like the badge from PvP is really strong for Demo, for example. There's a 1-minute stat badge from PvP on use. That's historically very good for Demo. Now, if that's still going to proc that 40-second internal cooldown, then it might not be better than Ruby still. I'm not quite sure how that's gonna play out. But yeah, I'm pretty sad that they nerfed WUs. WUs was fun in my opinion. Okay, so we're finally gonna go into the rotation here. Now, Demo rotation is fairly simple. The only real problems you have are when you're setting up your Tyrant, right? That's what I talked about earlier. The setup for the Tyrant is the important part of the rotation. Otherwise, it's very simple. Not a whole lot to think about at all. So we're going to be taking a look at the full single target build first. It's a little bit harder to play. Still not difficult though, but there's a bit more things to think about, right? You need to get your Vile Fiend out at the right time and stuff like that. So it does have a pretty set in stone opener here, which is nice because then you can just practice it every single time, right? It's going to depend a little bit on some procs, but nothing huge. So, well... we can just go through a simple like thought process of how you would want to open up with Demo, right? Well, you want to start the fight with 5 shards if you can, so precasting a Demon Bolt is going to be what you want to do pre-pull. Now, Soul Rot, as we talked about earlier with Naya, that lasts for 30 seconds, so that's going to be really good to use early on, aka our first global of the opener. Then we can just see like all of our demons, right? That's what we want to be doing. We want to be summoning demons to empower our Tyrant later on. Well, which demons last the longest? Those are the ones we're going to summon first, right? So Felguard lasts 17 seconds, Vile Fiend 15, and Dogs 12. And I think Imps last 9 if I'm not mistaken. So obviously you're going to want to summon this guy first, then Vile Fiend, then the Dogs, and then Imps. And this is where I recommend you getting some form of weak aura or tracker for your pets. LVI does have one called, if you toggle anchors there on LVI, it's called Class Totems. And it's going to show you all your pets. So I'm just going to place it here for demonstration purposes. I don't usually use it. But all of your pets are going to show up here with timers, which is going to be really important for your opener and for Demo in general. So we can precast the Demon Bolt, right? Then we're going to go into a Soul Rot. Then we're summoning all our demons. Then here is going to be 2 Shadow Bolts after this Vile Fiend to try to proc Demonic Calling. We didn't proc it. We're going to have to send out our Dogs. Some more Shadow Bolts. Some hands here. We can squeeze out 1 more hand. You can see our demons are falling off here almost. Oh, barely clipped all of them. I didn't get any procs during the opener, which meant it was one of the worst openers, right? For Demo. It's probably the worst one you can get. There's my Demonic Calling proc finally. And you can see here I'm doing like about 6k single target with that opener. Not the best, you can get better openers than that, but still some decent single target damage, you know. And I'm only 218 as well, so that's the opener with this build. We're also gonna take a look at the other build here in a while. Okay, so we're in the more Mythic Plus focus build now with Soul Conduits as well. You can see I don't have a lot of demons here, so the opener is obviously going to be more simple since you can't really like summon anything. You're still going to precast Demon Bolt obviously and Soul Rot, and then it's just dogs into a lot of imps basically. And you still have this timer here where you want to clip your dogs, right? So I'm probably going to have to send it right here sadly. And you can see my carnivorous stalkers aren't re-procking here. These are the debuffs on the target currently. But there we go, we send them in. There's from the shadows. And you can see we're doing quite worse in terms of the opener. I'm not sure what exactly we were at when the tyrant expired, but it is definitely worse in the opener obviously, since you don't have any pets for your demonic consumption really. But it is going to be more consistent AoE damage in a Mythic Plus setting, so still a decent build. And obviously if you play Felguard instead of the Soul Conduit, the opener is going to look way better, because then you have that 17-second window to play around again with the Felguard. You can get some more value out of demonic consumption as well, and it just does a lot of single target damage on pool, right, because it's a big CD compared to Soul Conduit, which is just going to end up like cancelling out Felguard over that 2-minute window, right? Where Felguard is on CD, then Soul Conduit is slowly going to catch up over 2 minutes. In terms of the rotation after the opener, it is very simple, as I said before. You're just pretty much spending Soul Shard with hand and generating them with Shadow Bolt or Demon Bolt if you get procs. Now, the procs are going to come from the dogs expiring. You always get 2 procs from that. And then also when an imp expires, you have a chance to get a proc. And then obviously, as I said before, the soul or the conduit here, Born of Blood, Hand of Gul'dan also has a chance to generate the charge of the Demonic Core. And this is big, like this generates a ton of charges as well. So you're gonna be casting Demon Bolt a lot, which is nice. I love instant spells, right? Then you can also use that to move a lot, which means the Demo is pretty mobile in a single target setting outside, or in an AoE setting as well, but outside of the Tyrant window, that is. Like in the Tyrant window it is very immobile, and then outside you're probably going to be able to jump around quite a lot. It's more mobile than Destro for sure. So we're going to take a look at some longer pulls here with some single target, because as you can tell, the opener is pretty straightforward. It might be a little fiddly to like clip that last millisecond of demons as I did in the other opener before, but you can also just play it a little bit more safe. You don't need to squeeze out that extra Shadow Bolt if you feel if you don't feel comfortable. You can get it out. The longer you get into a pull, if you're playing Wilfreds, well, you're gonna lower your Tyrant CD consistently over the course of the fight, right? So that means you're gonna have to think ahead a little bit here. When your Tyrant is about 30 seconds left on its CD, well, then you're still gonna reduce it some more with the shards you spend in that window, right? So when it has 30 seconds left, usually that's when I find it a very good idea to like start thinking about pooling some energy or pooling some shards, right? Because you want to be pooled before you summon the Tyrant. You want to be spending a lot of shards. If you're at like 1 shard, no Demonic Core procs, and you just want Shadow Bolt up to 3 and spend 1 hand and then summon the Tyrant, it's gonna be way worse than if you're at like 5 shards and you do like hand, Demon Bolt, hand, Tyrant, right? That's 3 hands in like basically like 6 or 7 globals maybe, because hand has a real short cast time. That's just way better than hard casting 1.7 second cast time Shadow Bolts before you're summoning your demon, right? So when the Tyrant's about to come up, about 30 seconds in, I pop Soul Rot, because that lasts for 30 seconds, and you're gonna end up reducing the Tyrant CD as well. So 30 seconds in, Soul Rot, and then I usually go to 5 shards and try to like save my demonic core procs, right? From now on, I'm saving most demonic core procs if I'm not overcapped. And I'm trying to pool a little bit. Now, since you only have 5 shards maximum, there's not like a whole ton of pooling you can do. Sometimes you're just gonna have to send out some shard or some hands to not overcap. Maybe when the tyrant is like 22 seconds left and you're at 5 shards, you're like, well, fuck, I'm just gonna have to do one more hand and then maybe get up to like 4 shards again before I send off my stuff. You know, it's not always gonna be optimal, but try to pool as much as possible. And then, obviously, just as in the opener, when the tyrant has about 17 seconds left is when I pop my Grimoire again, right? And then it's the same order, right? You have Grimoire, then Vile Fiend, then 2 Shadow Bolts, then a Dogs, then hands for the rest of the window, right? And it is going to be pretty tricky to line that up sometimes, especially if you have like movement phases during that exact window, which is where Demo's weakness lies, right? If you need to move during the setup window, it can be very tricky and very punishing. But we'll just try to play with it a little bit and see how it feels. So we're gonna do the same opener here again. You can practice this as much as you want, you know. Vile Fiend into 2 Shadow Bolts. Let's hope we proc the Calling. We don't, sad. Still gonna have to send out the Dogs. We can get one more hand out here. That was really close again. You can see how just like very close that is to expiring. And something really interesting here, if you notice, on the Blizzard UI, my Tyrant is actually, or sorry, my Grimoire is not even active here. So Blizzard UI thinks that I didn't clip these pets, but I actually did. That's why you need a good weak card. These timers here are going to show you if you clip these pets. I didn't really use Demonic Strength there either, was my bad. You should definitely use that after you summon your Tyrant. So here we can see 45 seconds left. You know, the Vile Fiend is going to come back up. We're going to save this Vile Fiend to the next Tyrant every single time. If you're playing Wilfred's, that is. So 30 seconds left. You can see our Soul Rod comes back up. We're going to use that. Now, from this point on is where I would save like the Demonic Corpus. You see I have 2 right now. I Shadow Bolt here instead. 2 Shadow Bolts. Now I summon my Vile Fiend. 15 seconds left. Dogs. I should probably have done one more Demon Bolt there. But you see I have Demon Bolt stacks now, so I can actually start pumping out hands here. If I had no procs there, I would not be able to pump that many hands, which just results in less imps and a worse window, right? So that's really important. You really need to make sure that your Demon Tyrants are set up well. That's basically the only damage that Demo really has. So if you fuck that up, you're going to be sorely disappointed and very subpar on the meters. And then something else to consider is since your Tyrant extends the duration of all your pets, right? Well, then you're going to end up having 2 sets of Dogs expiring fairly close to each other after your Tyrant expires, which means you're going to get like 4 Demonic core procs back to back there, and that can be really hard to deal with if you're already capped. So you make sure you spend a lot of those procs after your turn expires. Now you see we're at this again here, going in with 4 shards. That's fine. Our Dogs are not back up. That's fine. We can do some hands in the meantime, you know. And here I don't really have the balls. I could probably have squeezed out one more hand there, but it's a little bit more scary to do. Oh shit, I forgot to use my trinket there as well. But I could have squeezed out one more hand, but it is really scary to do that when you're in the middle of a rotation, right? Because on the pull, it's a lot easier to just like know exactly what you can squeeze out. But in the middle of a fight, you know, you have some mechanics going on. Maybe you have to move a little bit and stuff like that. It's not as worth to just like hard greed and try to squeeze out the last hand. Sometimes you just have to settle for what you can get there. But you can see the rotation outside of Tyrant is very easy. I'm just basically spending and generating. We're coming up on the Soul Rot window here. These Dogs, I should have sent them earlier. I should definitely have sent them a lot earlier. That was pretty troll. And this is an example of a horrible window for me here. I had no Demonic Calling procs. My Dogs are poorly timed, right? My Dogs are gonna come back up like just before the Tyrant, or just after the Tyrant actually. So you can see here, I'm ending up delaying this Tyrant by like 5 or 7 seconds there, just because I hadn't pooled properly, I hadn't gotten my dogs on CD properly. My Vilefin was also pretty bad. So you can see the loss there. I'm gonna lose like a couple of seconds on the Tyrant CD as well. Maybe I even, yeah, maybe I didn't see it because I didn't track my Soul Rot buff, but there's a possibility that that Soul Rot buff actually fell off probably, because I did use it like 33 seconds before Tyrant came up or something. So since I delayed that Tyrant so much, it was very possible that my Soul Rot fell off before I even summoned Tyrant there, which is very bad, very bad. Let's learn from that mistake. Let's go back here and say, never ever use Soul Rot 33 seconds before the Tyrant comes up. That's just greedy. Use it like 30, 27, something like that. You just make sure that you're gonna get it off, right? Way better than try to greed it out like I did. Okay, so we covered the single target rotation fairly well, I think. In terms of AoE, it's also gonna be really simple. In AoE, you're definitely gonna wanna be playing this build here. Felguard or Soul Conduit is fine, as I said before. And the rotation is gonna be pretty simple. Every second hand you're gonna wanna implode. So dogs obviously high priority, they proc that from the shadows and everything. Really good, really good. You can see here I've done 2 hands, I have 6 imps out. That's where I wanna implode. Implode with 6 imps. Then you do it all over again, right? Summon some more imps. And here's where, if you're playing from the shadows, well, then the target's gonna take more Shadow Flame damage from you if you have the buff up. So you don't really want to implode unless you have that buff from the dogs up. That's something to think about. So even if you're at 6 imps, maybe it's worth like waiting for the next dogs here, for example. I'm at 6 imp now. I probably should wait for these dogs here and then I'm imploding again. That's the rotation if you don't have a Tyrant, if you're just outside of CDs. And you can see it's not great. It's not great damage. That was only 3 targets though. Implosion is uncapped, which is actually really powerful. And your Dread Lash is also uncapped, right? So actually good uncapped AoE on 3 targets gonna end up seeming pretty poor, but remember that most of the time you're probably gonna be looking at like 6 to 12 target pulls in Mythic Plus if your tank knows what they're doing, right? Or even higher than that. And in that case, well, these cards are going to scale way better than they do right now. In terms of when you have your Tyrant on single target, when you have your Tyrant up, it's not really worth imploding excessively, because your Tyrant extends the imps, right? So the imps are not falling off, which means that imploding is a lot worse. Extend the dogs there. See, we have 12 imps out. Normally we would implode here, but since the Tyrant is extending all those imps, they're not gonna fall off anytime soon, so we don't have to implode here. I usually implode when I get my second dogs out here, so this is where I implode. You know, reproc that Shadow Flame buff, send all of those massive imps into the enemy. And then this is where I would definitely consider something else here. If this was a Mythic Plus key, right? Then it's very possible that this pack here, since I popped my Tyrant and everything on it, and maybe some other guy popped as well, maybe this pack is like pretty close to dying when I would have imploded those imps, right? I was at like 20 imps there. I could choose to implode it, or I could choose to just hold on to the imps. Normally, all those imps would just expire, right? But since Blizzard actually made a good change that makes your imps stick around outside of combat a little bit. So if your group kills the pack and you have like 20 imps still and they're about to expire, well, if you're out of combat, they're gonna keep going until the next pack, most likely. Especially if you like pull the next pack in like the next maybe 10 to 20 seconds, they're gonna stick around, which means that going into the next pack, you can potentially have a massive imp army to implode, right? And that's actually where a lot of the burst damage of Debo comes from in keys. Is just holding on to those imps from a Tyrant window. So a really good example of this in a key would be, for example, of this pack. Pretty small pack here, 3 mobs, right? I have my Tyrant. Well, my Tyrant takes a while to set up, right? So let's say the tank pulls the pack. I'm starting to set up my Tyrant window here. I'm going Soul Rot, dogs. I'm trying to spend imps before my dogs run out. And then here comes my Tyrant. I'm starting to pump. Well, by this time, most likely, like most of the other guys in the group have already started killing this pack pretty fucking heavily. And there goes my second dogs, right? Maybe now the pack's already dead. And I have 15 imps here. Well, what do? You just hold on to them. I'm not going to be able to show this now probably because I'm still going to be in combat. Probably, maybe we can get it off. Yeah, you can see I'm out of combat. These imps should have expired a long while ago, but they actually haven't. Well, let's say this is the next pack here in the dungeon. Well, then you can just open up with this insane thing here. It goes dogs, proc the Shadow Flame thing, and then just implode 15 imps. You see, 26k burst damage there. DPS, pretty fucking insane. And if that's a bigger pack than 3 mobs, well, obviously you're gonna do way more damage than this. So a little tip there for the demo dungeons. In terms of other good tips to keep in mind when playing demo, it's just that, as I said earlier, the Blizzard UI, some of these like Afnor weak Rs I have here, they just don't show the correct demon timers. Sometimes you're gonna extend the demons with your Tyrant, but for some reason the Blizzard UI and the weak Rs tell you that you haven't extended them. One weak R that I found that is really good for this is just the Demon Timers V3. I'm gonna link it in the description to this video if you guys want it for Demonology. I really like these bars for the timers. They just make it very visually clear how long duration there is remaining on all your demons, and you can see like one is going down quicker than the other ones and stuff like that. So really useful for demo. We'll link it in the description if you want it, as I said. Otherwise, there's just one more thing I wanted to mention, and it is really annoying. I hope Blizzard fixes this, but there is an annoying bug with Wilfred's where if your Tyrant is on CD and it's coming back up, right? So it's coming back up, it's about to come back up. It's the last global, right? It's 1 second, and then it goes into the last global here with the global animation. If you, during that last global of the Tyrant coming off CD, if you spend soul shards there, because spending soul shards is going to reduce that CD of Demonic Tyrant from Wilfred's, but if you're in the very last global of that Tyrant CD, then that's going to trigger another global for specifically the Tyrant CD. So if you want to do like hand into Tyrant, well, I wouldn't have been able to do this if this was on CD, if this was during the last global, because that would have triggered another global for the Tyrant. You can't fucking summon the Tyrant directly after, and that costs you a second, so that can actually cause your demons to fall off. And it's incredibly annoying, because it does like punish you for playing the spec very well, right? You want to be using, like, if you set the window up perfectly, well, guess what? Your last hand before the Tyrant is gonna pretty much be when it's like half a second off a global, right? If you set it up perfectly, because then those last soul shards are gonna clip like 1 second off the cooldown. You're gonna have it up again, and you can just press it as soon as you finish that hand. The bug prevents that. It tilts me off the face of the earth when it happens, to be frank. So beware of that. And it just incentivizes a little bit more safe demon setups, you know, get the hand out while this thing is actually usable, and then you can use it the next global, no problem. It's only if it's in that last global of the city. Okay guys, well, that was the Demonology guide. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. If you want to see more content, as I said before, subscribe. If you have any specific questions about Demonology talents or rotation or whatever, just hit me up. I'll answer anything in the comments. Also, if you just want to voice your opinion on the video or suggest something for me in the future, be sure to leave a comment. I will be responding to all of them. And yeah, have a good one, guys. See you in the next video.